What's up, everybody? My name is Ryan Thomas, and you are tuning in to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast, coming to you live from Buffalo, New York. And guess what? For those of you that don't know, UFC 217 is finally about to go down this Saturday night live at Madison Square Garden Arena in New York City, New York, the big city, the Big Apple. Michael Bisping will defend his UFC middleweight title against George St. Pierre, the longtime reigning UFC welterweight champion who is coming back from a 4-year hiatus in the sport of MMA. You also have in the co-main event the bitter rivalry known as Cody Garbrandt versus TJ Dillashaw taking place. And last but not least, a strawweight barn burner of a title fight between Joanna Jędrzejczyk and Rose Namajunas. 3 title fights on one night. 3 title fights that I promise you will be barn burners, will be pure fire, pure fury inside the UFC octagon, and I cannot wait to put my $60 down to watch it. That being said, as I really unveil my notes here, in looking at both Michael Bisping and George St. Pierre, 2 fighters that I have the utmost respect for. 2 guys that most people think, well, I'm really rooting for GSP. GSP is the fighter that really got me into the sport. He's the guy that was the main draw during the heyday, in my personal opinion, of the UFC. So he's a guy that I admire. I admire what he has done for the sport, bringing USADA into the equation, making the sport clean. But Michael Bisping is a guy that I have the utmost respect for, a true fighter in every sense of the word, and a guy that will definitely be in the UFC Hall of Fame. So one segment that I thought of creating for the Thomas Take Sports Podcast tonight, in particular, Michael Bisping, the Fab Five, in which I count down the top 5 victories of Michael Bisping's long career, a career that spans over a decade, a career that really comes to quite possibly a conclusion, as Bisping has hinted, with a win or a loss, it could be his final fight inside the UFC octagon. Only time will tell if that is true. But in the midst of looking at Bisping's decade-long career, one win that I rank as his 5th best win in the UFC, we go moving forward throughout his career. Let's really go back, far back, specifically UFC 89, in which Bisping entered a fight coming off a win versus Jason Day at UFC 85. Bisping was the main event headliner at UFC 89 versus the crippler, Chris Lieben, a guy that real hardcore UFC fans would know best for his time during the Ultimate Fighter Season 1. And if that's papers you're hearing in the background, that's me flipping through my notes here. So Chris Lieben was a guy that was a devastating knockout artist. He was a guy that really put on some hellfire performances inside the UFC cage. Bisping beating Lieben by being a fundamentally sound fighter, sticking and moving and kickboxing his way to a victory via unanimous decision in October of 2008 in Birmingham, England. Lieben, after the fight, tested positive for stanozolol. I am terrible at pronouncing drugs, so never ask me to do that again. Chris Lieben, UFC 89, October of 2008. Realistically, his next bout was the worst fight of Bisping's career, in which he lost via devastating knockout to Dan Henderson at UFC 100, where Bisping went on a quote-unquote public tour where he had traveled the world with Dan Henderson promoting that fight. So, and obviously the Ultimate Fighter. So the 5th ranked win in the career of Michael Bisping, I have being his victory versus Chris Lieben back in October of 2008. You fast forward 4 years later, Bisping had lost a couple times, once to Dan Henderson, once to Vanderlei Silva, once to Rashad Evans, and that was actually 3 times. He had lost 3 times He'd lost to Evans before Lieben, but he had lost twice since the Lieben fight, once to Dan Henderson and once to Vanderlei Silva, pre-USADA era in the sake of Vanderlei Silva. The fourth best win for Michael Bisping, UFC 152, in where Bisping took on Brian Stann. Brian Stann is notoriously known as a fantastic UFC commentator, but Brian Stann was a Marine, guy that fought in Desert Storm, a tough SOB to say the least. And Bisping dominated Stann for the better part of 15 minutes, winning a unanimous decision. That is no tough task, or that is no easy task, I should say. That's a very tough task. And Stann, the victory off of Stann, led Bisping on a weird warpath towards the UFC title, the likes of which we have never seen. His next bout, he would lose to Vitor Belfort via head kick, beat Alan Belcher, lose to Tim Kennedy, and then his next great win, the third greatest win in his UFC career, was a victory over Kung Lee. Kung Lee, for the better part of a decade, was one of the best MMA strikers in the world. And if you have never watched Bisping, I could make the argument that the Bisping-Kung Lee fight was Bisping's greatest performance of his career. He virtually dominated and dispatched Kung Lee in a 5-round main event fight. It was shortly after the UFC decided to make each main event of their fight nights or pay-per-views non-title or title fight, regardless of those two differences in the fight. The main event was always going to be 5-minute rounds, and Kung Lee was destroyed in this fight by Michael Bisping. Watch it. It took place August 23rd, 2014 at UFC Fight Night Bisping versus Lee, and 60 G's baby, Michael Bisping got the Performance of the Night bonus. Moving on, the second best win of Michael Bisping's career was none other than the Spider, Anderson Silva. Bisping entered the bout 27-7. After his fight versus Kung Lee, he had lost to Luke Rockhold via guillotine. He defeated C.B. Dalloway, defeated Talis Leitis, a former title opponent, title challenger to Anderson Silva. Finally got the fight that he wanted, in which he took on Anderson Silva in London, England, in front of his home crowd. And this was one of the most insane fights you will ever see. A fight in which I actually thought Bisping won 4 out of the 5 rounds. The only round in which the Bisping didn't win was probably the third round, in which Anderson Silva threw a flying knee after Bisping had lost his mouthpiece, and Anderson thought he had won the fight, but Herb Dean never stopped it. So Michael Bisping had to fight the 4th round and the 5th round with a completely shattered face, winning those 2 rounds and winning the fight. I could, again, make the argument that this is the best performance of Michael Bisping's career, but I can't rank it ahead of the number one moment. And the number one moment is a moment that is most obvious to MMA fans recently. The moment in which Michael Bisping stepped in for the injured Chris Weidman on 2 weeks' notice at UFC 199, June 4th, 2016, to face the then UFC middleweight champion Luke Rockhold, a man that 2 years prior, almost 2 years prior, had defeated Michael Bisping, as I stated, via submission. He was responsible for Bisping's last loss. Bisping wins 3 straight fights, gets the title shot on 2 weeks' notice versus Luke Rockhold, wins 3 fights versus C.B. Dalloway, Talis Leitis, and Anderson Silva, and gets the title shot against Luke Rockhold. Now, the time frame in which Anderson fought Bisping, or Bisping fought Anderson, I should say, February 27th, 2016, and then a mere 4 months later, not even 4 months later, 3 months and a couple weeks later, June 4th, 2016, Bisping takes on Luke Rockhold and wins the fight via first-round knockout. the fight that long awaited Michael Bisping, the title shot, fight that he took on 2 weeks' notice. After 10 years in the UFC, he wins the UFC middleweight championship, and it was the performance of the night as it should have been. He got all the bonuses, all the money that he wanted, and defended his belt once versus Dan Henderson at UFC 204, which was a very close fight, but a fight that the judges believed Bisping won. It was personally a fight that I did not think Bisping won, but to say the least, what a hell of a career. This guy went from being in title eliminators to losing those title eliminators. He had fought Chael Sonnen to a very close fight at a time in which Chael Sonnen was running through everybody. That was back at UFC on Fox, Evans versus Davis. Rashad fought Phil Davis. January 28th, 2012. That was a huge fight at the time. That was a fight, too, on short notice. Chael was originally slated to fight Mark Munoz, and Bisping, I think, was originally slated to fight Damian Maia, if I'm not mistaken. So that fight was not supposed to happen. It did, and Bisping fought Chael pretty damn tough. That was where we saw some of the patented scrambles from Michael Bisping, getting back up to his feet, working back up to his feet, and making things happen. So those are the Fab Five wins of Michael Bisping's career. My top 5 great wins that Bisping had in his career. Let me rerun the countdown for you. Chris Lieben back in October of 2008 at UFC 89. You fast forward 5 years later, Michael Bisping wins versus Brian Stann. You fast forward 2 years later, Bisping beats Kung Lee. You fast forward 2 years later, he beats Anderson Silva. You fast forward 3 months later, he beats Luke Rockhold for the UFC middleweight title. A great career, a remarkable career, a career that has really, he's earned everything he's got, and that is tough to come by these days. We're in an era of the UFC where guys don't necessarily earn the title shots. They're gifted the title shots due to their marketing ability. Where Michael Bisping said, I'll fight Luke Rockhold anytime, any place, anywhere, got the title shot, won it, and has defended it once since then, and now will be fighting George St. Pierre, defending his title once more. Hoping to defend his title once more, defending his title once more the second time. And I wish Bisping all the luck in the world. He's got a tough task ahead of him. George St. Pierre is not Luke Rockhold. George St. Pierre is not Anderson Silva. George St. Pierre is not Kung Lee, Brian Stann, or Chris Lieben. And George St. Pierre is not Dan Henderson. A complete contrast in opponents from his last opponent, which marked his 30th career MMA victory. Bisping looking for 31 versus George St. Pierre, November 4th, live, New York City, pay-per-view. You gotta buy it. You just have to. I'm Ryan Thomas, and that was the Michael Bisping Fab 5, the top 5 best wins of Michael Bisping's MMA career. Tune in tonight, tune in tomorrow as I recap the Fab 5 of George St. Pierre's career. What 5 victories stand out to me the most in the long and lengthy resume of the fighter known as GSP? I'm Ryan Thomas. That was the Thomas Take. Thank you for tuning in.